Well, originally I started this as a presentation about forgeries, and the stamps I was showing were primarily from Crete. So I got the idea of sort of expanding the presentation to cover all of Crete, which has several different issues that were extensively forged. But then I changed from calling it Postal History of Crete to Philately because I really have almost nothing in the way of covers. This is just about the stamps. I would love to have more covers, but they're not easy to come by, at least in the earlier period. I have some covers that were sent from Crete after it became part of Greece in 1913. But the interesting stamps are all from the period before that. In this list of dates, there are only a few that really affected the stamps involved. Um, the 1897 intervention by the great powers. Um, the Greek population of Crete was in a perpetual state of uprising against the Turks. They really didn't like being ruled by Turkey. And there were many, many incidents uh, of uprisings, usually suppressed rather violently by the Turkish army. And in 1897, there was essentially a peacekeeping operation mounted by the six so-called great powers. Four of them stayed to occupy Crete in different administrative zones. And they decided to set up an autonomous Cretan state after the powers left. They wanted to put control of Crete in the hands of an autonomous government, which was still technically part of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans retained at least nominal control of Crete all the way up until 1913, but they didn't have any effective authority there, and they were not involved in the mail or issuing stamps after 1898. Then 1905, the rebellion, this man Venizelos, who later became quite famous as Prime Minister of Greece, was originally from Crete, and he was appointed Minister of Justice in this autonomous government that was set up. But he fell into a state of disagreement and conflict with the High Commissioner, this Prince George, and so he was fired essentially from his job. And he went off to a place called Teriso and got some collaborators together, and they held an uprising calling for the union of Crete with Greece. Now, the rebellion was suppressed, but this uprising did lead Prince George to retire, and he was replaced by a Greek statesman, Alexandros Tsimis. 1908, there was a vote in which Cretans voted for unification with Greece. However, it did not take place. The Cretans considered themselves part of Greece, but Greece didn't accept that Crete belonged to the country officially. Not until 1913, after the Turks were defeated in the Balkan War, and the Treaty of London required Turkey to completely give up all control over Crete. Then the unification with Greece went ahead. So here's Crete, the Cretan Sea to the north and the Libyan Sea to the south. The major towns, Chania, Rethymnon, Herakleion, and Neapolis. And you see the different zones of administration there, the Italian, the Russian, the British, and the French. These dividing lines don't exactly coordinate with the present-day provinces of Crete, but some of them do. And I noticed that all these major towns are on the northern shore. I don't know why that is, except that I suspect it must get quite hot in the south when the wind blows up from Africa. Libya is famous for its hot wind, the Ghibli, and I would imagine that would affect the southern shore of Crete, but that's just a surmise on my part. So I mentioned that Turkish stamps were originally used, and the most of the mail overseas was carried by the Austrian post office, the Austrian post office in the Turkish Empire. they used their ordinary offices in Turkey stamps until 1903, when they started issuing special stamps for Crete. However, the stamps for Austrian offices in Crete were also valid in other parts of the Ottoman Empire. So they're listed as offices in Crete, but the one example I have is a stamp of that type that was used elsewhere. Showed these before. These are Austrian offices in the Turkish Empire used in various cities: Constantinople, Varna, Alexandria, Beirut, and Philippopolis. More of these. They started, one of the lower left stamp here is still denominated in soldi, the same currency used for the stamps that Austria issued for Lombardy, Venetia, but they later overprinted the stamps in the local currency, para and piastra. Here are two that were actually used in Crete. Canea is another name for Crete on this Austrian offices in Crete stamp, and Candia is another name for Herakleion, one of the major towns. These are the special stamps issued for offices in Crete, and they're valued in centime and franc, French currency. It's not clear to me exactly why that is, except that the stamps were valid throughout the Ottoman Empire, and French was a kind of a universal language. It was one that was most popularly used for foreign correspondence and dealing with officials. Anyone who didn't speak Turkish would usually fall back on French, because that was the language that most other people knew. After the overprints, they issued a special set based on the issue for Austria itself. Emperor Franz Joseph. Again, the values in centime and franc. They're the same as the Austrian stamps, except for the colors and the denominations. Here's my stamp. This is an Austria offices in Crete stamp used to send a card from Salonika to Prague, okay, which is now in Greece, but at that time it was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was Turkey then. And going to Prague, Bohemia, of course, there was no Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic didn't exist then. That was part of the Austrian Empire. Here's the other side of the card, a bird's eye view of Salonika, but inscribed in Turkish and in French, the international language. So these are stamps issued specially for Crete, French offices in Crete. And again, they're similar to the domestic French stamps, except for the inscription Crete at the bottom. And by the way, I'm not showing the entire set in these cases, either with the Austrian or the French or the Italian offices, but just a sort of a representative sample. I didn't want to try to mount all the stamps I have from these offices, but just a representative collection. So again, here's the Italian effort. They took their domestic Italian stamps and overprinted them. The very first one is only surcharged in piastra, the local Turkish currency, but issued for offices in Crete. And later they used La Canea, the Italian version of Crete. Now, this gets to some of the stamps that are most enthusiastically collected, the issues for the administrative districts of Great Britain and Russia. Neither of these countries made any serious effort to set up a postal service in Crete. But locally, the administration, by the way, without the approval of the home government, they just did this on their own, issued stamps for Crete, which were valid within their own district. So the Russian stamps were valid for use within the Russian district, and the British, and so on. And this was the first effort on the part of the British occupying authorities. It's sort of a homemade stamp, printed with words reading provisional postage Heracleion. And Heracleion was the big town in the British sector. Another version of the same stamp, and I noticed that this is actually, it's clipped out and saved from a piece of correspondence. Apparently, it looks as though this went through the mail. We can't be certain that it did, but it looks that way. It's canceled, and part of the letter was saved. However, this stamp is a forgery, as you can plainly see if you compare the two, the original version. Now, how do I know this is, well, it's because I have a book all about these forgeries. There are 4 or 5 different types of forgeries that were made. It's very clear that it's not at all like the original version. The printing is much thinner on the forgery, but those who are interested in examining and identifying the forgeries have studied the matter and decided, that these are the originals, and this is one of the 4 or 5 different types of forgeries. And this is the second issue by the British, kind of a perfunctory design, but very extensively forged. And as I mentioned last time I talked about these, there's a simple way to identify the forgeries. Right above the numeral of value is a little circle with a dot. And on the original stamps, that circle is complete. Sometimes if it's faintly printed, parts of the line around the circle may be kind of faint, but on the forgeries, it very clearly just breaks off. It's an incomplete circle broken at the bottom. And there are lots and lots of these forgeries on different kinds of paper and with different perforations. Notice also that the perforations on the forgeries are kind of crude, and in some cases the paper is kind of brownish. These are very, very commonly found. I mean, I have whole sheets of these things. They're worth, they're very little. The third issue, same design in different colors, and again, same. Apparently, they used the same printing plates because the originals still have the complete circle around the dot there above the value, and the forgeries have a broken circle. This is an issue I didn't show last time. I hadn't yet put it in this presentation. This is the first issue of the Russian office. Again, like the first British issue, kind of a crude homemade stamp with the Russian eagle. And at the top, Rethymno, that's Rethymnon, the major town in the Russian sector. On the stamp on the far left, I notice it's actually inscribed in French. It looks like timbre poste provisoire, provisional postage. The other design has Rethymnon at the top, and then just provisional postage in Greek at the bottom. So here's an example. They printed these in sheets with a small number of stamps. I don't have the exact number. I've read it, but I don't remember. Anyway, every block of 4 was imprinted with this control. Why they did that is not entirely clear to me, but it was a pretty common practice to apply a control mark that apparently you were supposed to give the stamp an official character. This is the second Russian issue, again with a control mark, either in blue or in purple, and the cancellation Rethymnon, either as a circular date stamp or a straight line. These are the 3 values, 1 and 2 metallic and 1 grozion. 1 grozion is essentially the same as 1 piaster. It's another name. And the metallic is another name for para. So, but except that 1 metallic was equal to 10 para. So 2 metallics, 20 para, and 40 para made 1 piaster. So in this case, 40 metallic made 1 grozion. The stamp was issued in these 6 colors plus black, which I don't have. The black ones are very expensive, so I haven't got around to trying to get any of those. these two colors, the rose and the violet, are pretty close. These can be confused. So you have to, if you're looking at this and trying to decide whether it's light violet or dark rose, you might need to compare it with the other stamp to be sure. With each of these colors, there are 3 stamps. So the orange in the upper left, there's a 1 metallic, 2 metallic, and 1 Grosjean stamp. And similarly for all the others. So 6 times 3, there are a total of 18 different stamps, not counting the black. So here again, there are forgeries, and the way the easiest way to tell the forged stamp from the genuine is in the shading of these leaves. In the corner of the stamp are leaves. The forged stamps don't have any shading in the leaves, whereas the genuine stamps do. You can see here, and also on the green one, a little shading in the leaves, whereas no shading here. There are many other minor differences, the size of the numerals and other things. Now, where these came from, I really have no idea. It's clearly a different printing plate. Somebody went to the trouble to make a pretty darn accurate imitation of these stamps. But, these were wildly popular with collectors, and they still are. I mean, people still go to the trouble, like me, for example, of trying to get all these different varieties of colors and cancellations. So there's a third issue which differs from the second only by the addition of a star on each side here beside the trident. This was issued in 4 different colors, and these are considerably more affordable. It's easy to form a collection. Once again, there are 3 stamps, 3 values for each color. So you have 12 more stamps there. And again, why they did this, I can't think of any reason other than just to create more varieties that they could sell to collectors. And here again, the same kind of forgeries exist. The leaves on the sides have no shading on the forged stamps. And you'll also find the perforations are crude, especially the one on the right, very rough. So it's a rather obvious forgery. Okay, so now onward to the autonomous Cretan state. And now we're getting into material I have not shown at all ever. The Cretan state was pretty good about setting up a post office and a postal system with stamps, which were widely used. They're very common in used condition, for the most part, at least the lower values. And the stamps were issued from 1900 until 1913, when Crete finally became a part of Greece. Here's the first set. And by the way, all these engraved stamps you're going to see were printed in London by the firm of Bradbury and Wilkinson. The Cretan government sent off its order for stamps, and they were all printed in England and then sent back to Crete. The 1 and the 50 lepta stamps show Hermes tying on his winged sandals. You see his caduceus there on the left. The 5 and the 20 lepta is Hera, the goddess wife of Zeus, I believe. And the other 2 stamps are Prince George, second son of the reigning King George. His first son, Constantine, later became king. But this man was, second in line, and he wasn't going to become king. So he was appointed to be the High Commissioner of the autonomous Cretan state. These are the high values of the first set. And here we have some more interesting themes. On the left, we have Talos. Well, Talos was an automaton. It doesn't look like it in this picture, but he was a bronze man commissioned by Zeus and fabricated by Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods. And his job was to circle the island of Crete and prevent any hostile forces or ships from approaching. You see, in his hand, he's got a stone which he's about to throw at any approaching vessel. The reason for this was Zeus had abducted Europa from the Asian mainland and brought her over to what is now called Europe. Europe is named after her. There are images of Zeus disguised as a bull, a white bull, abducting Europa. So he brought her to Crete, and then he commissioned this mechanical man to be built to protect the island. Okay, in the center we have King Minos, king of Crete. He was the one who had the labyrinth built to house his stepson, the Minotaur. This is probably too long a story to get into, but you've heard of the Minotaur, this creature who is half man and half bull. He occurs in some of the drawings and paintings of Picasso, who have somewhat of an obsession with him. There was a scheme by which the king of Crete required 7 young men and 7 young women to be brought to the labyrinth and fed to the Minotaur every 9 years. I guess every 9 years the Minotaur got hungry and needed to feast on these, or maybe he, kept them for a while and feasted on them one at a time. The Greek hero Theseus actually volunteered to be one of the young men sent to be eaten by the Minotaur, but he killed the Minotaur instead. So he became, legendary hero for that. And there was another character, a Cretan princess named Ariadne, who helped him to escape. You probably know this part of the story. Using a thread that she unwound as she went out of the labyrinth and helped Theseus find his way. The third image here, and by the way, these images are mostly taken from ancient ancient Cretan coins. You can even see the coin shape here. There was a scholar of ancient history of Crete who suggested that these coins be used as the motifs on the stamps. This is actually St. George in a familiar scene slaying the dragon. St. George became the patron saint of Great Britain, not of Greece. However, St. George was actually originally a Greek person. He lived in a Greek settlement in what's now Turkey. So there were many such areas of Asia Minor that were Greek at that time.
I think George just means farmer in Greek.
Yes, I think that's right. Mm-hmm. He was a real person, this St. George, one of the Christian martyrs of the early centuries, second or third centuries of the Common Era. And like many others, he was executed when he refused to recant his Christian beliefs. The story about the dragon, from what I read, was added many, many centuries later, like around 1,000 years later. Somehow they wanted to embellish the story of St. George, and so they had him slaying this dragon. All right, enough of mythology. There's a lot of the early Cretan stamps were overprinted with this word provisional, prosorinon, provisional. And there's a story behind that, which is kind of complicated, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. When these stamps were issued, you notice they're denominated in Greek currency, 25 lepta. But Greek currency was not in wide circulation in Crete at that time. They wanted to replace the existing local Turkish currency with Greek, but it took time for that to occur. And in the meantime, the stamps were being sold. And this 25 lepta stamp was the basic stamp for overseas postage. However, the exchange rate between the Greek currency and the local Turkish currency was such that it made these stamps more expensive than the corresponding stamps of the offices, the Austrian, the French, and the Italian offices stamps. You could get one of those stamps to send an overseas letter for 1 piaster, whereas the equivalent in Greek currency was more. So in order to make these stamps competitive and to not put the local, the new Cretan post office at a disadvantage, they sold these stamps for 1 piaster. They made them the same price as the office's stamps. But because they were not being sold for face value, they applied this overprint provisional. And the idea was after they had issued stamps that were of a competitive rate with the other post offices, then they would be able to remove the provisional overprint. In actuality, the stamps were used with and without overprints. Always, sold for 1 piastre, whether they had the overprint or not. Most of them were overprinted, most of the ones that ended up actually being used. So that's the reason for that. And of course, this generated a huge number of varieties for collectors to collect. The overprint, the provisional overprint in red, in black, and in a larger typeface. And these are on many, many stamps. All of those stamps of the first issue I showed are overprinted with this overprint. But I just show the three, just to show the 3 different varieties of typeface. There was also a change of color. If you recall, the 20 lepta stamp was originally printed in red, but the 10 lepta was also in a very close, very similar shade of red. And the Universal Postal Union required that the basic stamp for domestic postage be printed in red. And so that was the 10 lepta. And this, in order to avoid confusion between the 2 red stamps, they changed the color of the 20 to this orange. And they also changed the color of the 50 from a kind of lilac shade to this blue. And I don't know of any reason for that. Second issue also has attractive designs, mostly based on coins. And I don't even know what all of these are. The first one is the goddess Artemis, god of the hunt. This one I don't remember. Here's Prince George again. This on the 20 lepta, we have now the infant Zeus looks like being suckled by a deer. I don't know that story, but there it is on the coin. This creature is known as Triton. He's a half fish, half man, sort of like the centaur of the sea, with also carrying the trident, which is the symbol of the god Neptune. And finally, this is Ariadne, the Cretan princess who helped Theseus escape. And then there are high values here, second set of high values. The first one, also an ancient coin, showing Zeus disguised as a bull, actually a white bull, but it doesn't show up on the coin, abducting Europa and bringing her to Crete. This is the Arcady Christian monastery on Crete, which happened to be the site of one of the many, many uprisings of local Greeks against the Turkish administration. And in the background, I believe that's probably Mount Ida. It's some miles away from the monastery, but it's the tallest mountain on Crete. And you see it's probably snow-covered most of the year. And finally, these are ruins at Knossos, ancient capital of Crete. All right. Now we're getting into the 1905 rebellion. As I mentioned before, there was conflict between Venizelos and Prince George. This place, Theriso, is very small. It hardly shows up on the map of Crete, but this is where the rebels mounted their brief and ineffectual rebellion, which nevertheless did lead to the retirement of Prince George the next year. He was replaced by a Greek statesman. And while they were in the midst of this brief rebellion in the fall of 1905, the rebels managed to issue a couple of sets of stamps. The first ones are just crude hand stamps. Yes, these got out of order. This is the first one I meant to show. This is the full set, 5, 10, 20, 50 lepta, and 1 drachma. These also have been extensively forged. And then the next slide I was going to show is this, which shows 1 original stamp, the 5 on top, and 3 forged versions. once again, this information about these forgeries is contained in the comprehensive book Comparisons of Hellenic Postal Stamps by Vlastos. You can see there are many slight differences. That the image within the circle here has many differences from the original, and also the typeface of the numeral. For example, if you look at this 5, it seems it has more of a point here at the bottom than the original does, and many other slight differences. Here's the original 20 lepton stamp and 3 forgeries of that. And by the way, this is one of many cases in which the original stamp is actually cruder in some ways. If you look at the box, for example, around the inscription, some of the forgeries are cleaner looking, and the line is straighter, but it just so happens that that's a forgery, and this is the original version of the stamp. It's provisional government, kubernesis, which I guess is really the origin of the word government. We have also the word cybernetic, but I believe that same Greek word kubernesis is the origin of our word government. So provisional government of Crete.
Kubernos was the helmsman who steers a boat.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So that's what government means.
Right.
It directs the population. By the way, since these were issued by rebels, who in the world honored the? I don't think you could mail very far.
No. These were. And this is why they're not listed in Scott. Scott doesn't recognize, stamps that were issued, but never were actually part of a functioning postal system. So these are what you might call fantasy. They're not exactly bogus. They were issued by, a known group of people who aspired to control of territory and operation of a postal system, but didn't succeed. So they're listed in the specialized Greek catalogs, which list basically everything ever issued by any occupying force or rebel group or anybody, whether they actually succeeded in running a postal system or not. This is his second issue. They got around within a couple of months. They created not only those crude hand stamped issues, but this one, a lithographed issue. This is the image of Crete with the words Crete enslaved, Dule. And this is King George, the father of Prince George, who had been High Commissioner of Crete. But the whole idea of this rebel group was they aspired to unite Crete with Greece. And so they were honoring the Greek king. They have the picture of King George and the word Crete below. Okay, so now after the departure of Prince George, there was a third issue by the Cretan state, 1907, in which they replaced the 10 and the 25 lepta stamps, which had shown Prince George. You recall those, Prince George was on the 10 and the 25, but he was no longer there. So they replaced those stamps with a new 10 lepta showing a statue of Hermes by the ancient Greek sculptor Praxiteles. And this, the 25, showed the Greek statesman Simos, who took over leading the government of Crete. But the high value, the 1 drachma, very nice stamp here. This is actually sort of a gesture of respect, you might say. This scene depicts the arrival of Prince George in 1898, when he first came to Crete to take over the reins of the autonomous government. So, 1908, a plebiscite was held in which the Cretan people expressed a strong desire to be united with Greece. And as a result of that, the government decided to overprint all of their stamps with the word Greece, Hellas. This is only a small selection. Again, I'm showing the 3 different typefaces that were used. Many stamps. And this is why, you know, the number of stamps listed for Crete in the Scott catalog gets up to a pretty high number, because you had all these changes, all these overprints. Greece, this was, you know, aspirational. They considered themselves part of Greece, even if the Greek government did not yet accept responsibility for Crete. 3 different typefaces. Okay. Including on the postage due stamps. Now, if these have a familiar look, you may recognize this design as one extensively used in Norway, the post horn stamps. In fact, I believe there are some of these stamps of this design still in use, from what I've heard anyway, in Norway. It's the longest continually used stamp motif in the world. Why exactly it was selected for the Cretan postage due stamps, I can't say. But once again, after Prince George left and the plebiscite was held, they overprinted the postage due stamps, Greece, just like all the others. Now, getting toward the end, because the next stamps I'm going to show are actually stamps issued by Greece at the conclusion of the First Balkan War, when the Turks were defeated, and Greece quickly issued stamps for use in what they called the new territories, ones which had been liberated, shall we say, from Ottoman control. The stamp on the left shows the overprint, which means Hellenic administration. These are standard Greek stamps. There are whole sets of them were overprinted. And this one has a beautiful cancellation in Chania, Greek, Cretan town on the north coast of Crete. And also I have some of these. This was after they had used the overprints for a while. They issued a special set of stamps for the new territories in 1913. And these were canceled in Heracleion. The 10 is upside down so you can read the cancellation. See at the top, Heracleion. It's kind of faint, but you can. It's a nice, clean, complete printing of the cancellation in that town. So I deliberately put that upside down. So it's getting late. I have one more stamp to show, and this is worth thinking about, just to give the background. This was actually a sort of a joint issue. It was ordered by the Cretan administration as its the last act of its postal department, but also simultaneously approved by the Greeks and issued as a Greek stamp, but sold only in Crete. Well, Crete was now part of Greece, so that makes it Greek, but sold only in Crete, and also listed as a Greek stamp in the Scott catalog. So this is the stamp. You see there the tiny islet of Suda, where there's a fortress and a chapel. This chapel had been in ruins, but it was restored and named after, in honor of St. George, which was partly done in memory of the Greek King George, who had been assassinated earlier that year. He was assassinated essentially by a kind of a crazy person. There's no known political reason. He had just been victorious over the Turks in the Balkan Wars. Anyway, he was assassinated after 50 years of rule in Greece. And the flag, the Greek flag, was hoisted. The 2 dates here, I don't know why it took them so long. 1 February 1913 is the date when Greek forces arrived and took down the Turkish flag. But it took them, perhaps they wanted to wait until there was time, they could arrange a proper ceremony for hoisting the Greek flag, and that was done on the 1st of May, 1913. Nice looking stamp, I think. All right, any questions?